All right, so we are recording. This is I Wish You Were Dead bonus episode. Um, and this is mostly just going to be me drinking a beer and Gavin. Did you decide if you're going to be swearing in this episode?
It's gonna be a spur of the moment thing. So if you are not familiar with what is happening here, this is episode 31.5 of I
Of I
Wish You
Wish
Were
You Were Dead,
Dead.
a podcast about things that used to be alive.
Thank you. Uh, if you missed episode 31, we talked about sharks because it has been Shark Week. I don't actually know how long Shark Week is lasting this year. Um,
Wait, is it more than a week?
Sometimes it can be like 10 days. It depends. Whatever, you know.
How long has Shark Week been going on for?
We will talk about it. So, yeah, I wanted to do this part and sharks in the same episode, but like once I got through, I actually wrote this part of like our sort of little guideline first, and it turned out to be over a page before I even started talking about what sharks actually were. And then that section ended up being 2 pages on our Google Docs, and it ended up being over an hour conversation. So
Just on sharks.
just on sharks. So I'm like, we gotta split this somehow. So this is our first bonus episode. This one's gonna be much more casual and just sort of me ranting. It will be a very spur of the moment thing whether I choose to use expletives. So just a general warning. It won't be anything like bad. But
Nothing too bad, but just be aware. This is us having fun. This is us.
right. Yeah.
This is us having a good time on this one. Hopefully, the free flowing nature. You guys will have a good time as well.
Exactly. And as Mike mentioned, both he and I have an adult beverage in hand. So very relaxed, very casual, but potential younger person content warning for some language. Potentially, maybe, undecided. So I love sharks so much because of Shark Week. I grew up, well, yes, like as a kid, I watched lots of cartoons and things as children do, and as I still do, to be honest.
I no shame in that even. I still do.
I still watch Avatar: The Last Airbender like all the time. It's such a good show.
I've heard good things.
You need to watch it. It's on Netflix. It's so good.
I started watching it once and I just stopped for no good reason, but I all for giving it another shot.
You should. Um, but I also watched a ton of like Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, and such as a kid, which really helped me shaped me into the person that I am today. And I loved Shark Week so much. And like I've swam with sharks before when I was doing my fieldwork in Belize. I swam with nurse sharks, and I even got to like pet one because they don't have nurse sharks are the ones that like crush clams and stuff.
Right.
So like they wouldn't even try to bite you because it's like you don't look like a clam. So they're basically like little doggies, little 8-foot person-sized doggies. And so
you put a leash on them?
No, they don't have shoulders. I think it would just slip off the front. So I love Shark Week so much and have so much good nostalgia for Shark Week. And so before we talk about how it's gone downhill, let's talk about a little bit about how Shark Week got to the point where it could go downhill.
Okay.
So Shark Week is actually the longest running annual television event.
According to who?
Like whoever keeps track of this kind of thing, I don't know.
Wow, okay.
But it's the longest running annual, at least that is going, actually, I think ever from what I saw. But it was started in 1988.
This is completely a Discovery Channel creation, correct?
Yes. Started in 1988 and ran through today. And it started with much more of like a conservation focus because especially in the 70s and early 80s, we were doing real bad things to sharks.
Shocker.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like humans do that to every animal.
It's almost like the 70s and 80s weren't great times to be like, animals.
Yeah.
Or the environment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, to be fair, the 70s are when we phased out leaded gasoline, 50 years after the rest of the planet did, but sure. But, so especially in the 70s, a little-known movie, you might have heard of it, called Jaws, came out in 1975.
Yes, I'm familiar.
And after that, people started indiscriminately killing sharks.
It's not a good thing.
Sure isn't.
No, this has been directly shown just like as a cause, as a causal link between the movie coming out and
I mean, correlation isn't causation,
right?
but like
The
you can
correlation's pretty
see,
strong.
yes.
Okay.
On top of that was also when like commercial shark finning, cutting off their fins for like shark fin soup, became a thing. So shark fin soup is like a delicacy in several like East Asian countries. And so to
I really want to tread
optimize,
lightly on not wanting to
right,
comment on other people's culture while also
right,
please don't hurt sharks. Like
yes, exactly.
it's a balance that we want to strike, and whatever the most appropriate
Well, and
way
like
possible is.
many different people like around the entire planet eat shark meat. That's not an uncommon thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but shark fin soup specifically uh, is a real ecological problem because what fishermen kind of realized in the 70s was, okay, the fins sell for much, much more than like the rest of the meat does. So they just cut the fins off and drop the rest of the shark back in the water
Good
where
God.
it just dies.
Alive?
Yes.
Oh,
And so, as we sort of talked about last episode, sharks need their pectoral fins, the front fins that where their arms would be.
mm-hmm.
Um, they give them lift and help them steer while they're swimming. So without those, they can't stay up or steer when they swim. And
Right.
so, when you can take 10,000 fins, if your cargo hold in your ship holds that many fins, you can do that. You can kill 5,000 sharks, and the rest of your, why take the rest of the shark, which doesn't sell for as much, when you can use that same weight or space in your cargo for just the fins, which sell for much, much more.
Man, I say this about a lot of different things for a lot of different reasons, but that's one of the things where I wish I was at the meeting where this was decided, just to look around and see if there was any look on anybody's face that was like, eh?
Yeah.
Like,
So,
man, I need another drink.
so that was a really big thing in the 70s. And so in 1988, like I said, that's when Shark Week was started with a really conservation focused message, educating people about sharks and how they're not just these mindless things, as in Jaws, that just eat people because that's what they do. That and genuinely educate people about sharks. They had really excellent science communicators as the hosts. They didn't start having hosts until sometime in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And they had people such as Nigel Marvin, who I remember as a kid. He was maybe not on the same like level of Steve Irwin, but very Steve Irwin-esque.
Steve Irwin before Steve Irwin.
I mean, Steve Irwin was like around, obviously, but he
Well,
did Steve Irwin things without being Steve Irwin.
is that an episode we should do on Steve Irwin?
Maybe we can talk about it.
I love my guy Steve Irwin. All right, yeah, keep going.
But so he hosted, I think, 4 or 5 consecutive years. This guy did.
Mm-hmm.
They also had Les Stroud from Survivor Man host for several years.
Yeah, I have mixed things on him, but he's a good TV guy.
Right. He's at least somebody who is, science adjacent.
Yeah.
He still had shows on Discovery Channel and doing things with the network education wise, at the very least, even if it wasn't like science education, teaching people things. And then the host of Mythbusters hosted it at least twice, I think 3 times.
Adam Savage or Jamie Hyneman?
Both of them.
Oh,
both of them together.
Perfect hosts for
right.
I mean, they hate each other, but yes,
they don't hate each other. They don't get along great. They respect each other a lot.
If that's a distinction you want to draw, go for it.
Yeah. So up until about 2010, they had really good hosts, good educational programming. Was some of it a little over dramatized? Sure,
but it's
it's TV.
There's a lot of that's acceptable. There's
yeah,
that's fine.
And then you can see a very clear sort of turning point or pivoting point. So I think in 2010 was the year that they actually officially became the longest running annual television event.
Okay.
And in that same year, they had a person named Craig Ferguson host.
And I I'm assuming this is the late night host or former late night host.
Yes, it is.
All right. So my initial reaction, as somebody who is just I don't know anything about this. Craig Ferguson, good guy, funny late night host. He did some
Mm-hmm.
things no other late night host did. Not a science guy though.
No, and that's the thing.
Right.
From all I can tell, he's a great late night host. He was also a pretty good voice actor in several pieces that I enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
but not a science person. He is an entertainer.
Yes.
So he hosted in, I believe, 2010, and then a couple times later. But some other names that hosted, and this is in rough chronological order. Some of them might have hosted twice consecutively or something, but in roughly consecutive order. Andy Samberg hosted.
Like Lonely Island SNL.
Yes.
Oh, good God.
Comedian Andy Samberg.
Again,
Great comedian. I really enjoy Andy Samberg.
Yes, when my oh God was not about Andy Samberg, it was about Andy Samberg hosting a science show.
Right. After that, Philip DeFranco of YouTube hosted. Again, I enjoy Philip DeFranco.
I watch him. I have shown him in my classes. In the right context, he is very good at what he does.
Mm-hmm.
Not a I could say this about all of these guys. I have nothing personally against them, but wow.
After that, there was a comedian who, I hadn't actually heard of, but his name is Josh Wolfe. He hosted it quite a few times, actually. I had never heard of him, but I looked him up. He is a comedian.
Okay.
After that, a person named Eli Roth hosted it. He is a director, famous for several horror movies, such as, I believe, Cabin Fever was one that he directed.
Not inspiring.
No. And again, a horror movie director. Isn't that the message that you didn't want?
I was going to
about
say this whole
sharks?
Thing started the whole thing was started to, honor sharks and, try and provide valuable information at a time when sharks really could have used it. And horror movies, what you went with.
Right.
Or a guy who directed horror movies.
After that, Shaq hosted. Shaquille O'Neal. Again, he's a flat earther. That's a complete different conversation.
Is he actually? I think
he might have been trolling. He might have been trolling.
Right, I was going to say.
But still, he's at least flirted with it.
He was a poster. If you catch the term.
Yes. So again, I like Shaq a lot. I think he's very funny.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a scientist or even science communicator. After that, comedian Rob Riggle hosted. He is, what I know him best from is from Step Brothers. He's the Catalina wine mixer guy.
Right.
Among many other things. He's a very well-known, very successful comedic actor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe they had a host last year. This year, I actually had to look up who the host was because I've actually not watched any Shark Week. But the main host this year is Tiffany Haddish, or Haddish, however you pronounce her last name.
Okay.
Again, successful actor. Not a science person. And again, starting in 2010 was when this happened. And
right.
Perhaps coincidentally, Discovery Channel actually got a new CEO in 2007. And sometimes with these big media corporations, it takes a little bit for things to change. And I thought this was a fun tidbit for you. This person actually sits on the board of directors for Syracuse University.
Oh, goodness. Well, that's just wonderful.
And again, I have heard, reading up a little bit about this guy. He seems like a decent person. He's won a couple, seemingly good awards. But I'm like, it just seems a little, pun completely not intended, but fishy.
Well, right.
That this happened very shortly after he became in charge. Mm-hmm. But what really did it for me, it was declining in scientific value a little bit. But what really does it for me is in 2013, they came out with a fake documentary called Megalodon, The Monster Shark Lives. And this documentary, in as big of quotes as I can possibly emphasize on that,
Mm-hmm.
Starts with a few lines on the screen, and I put this directly on our doc because I want to make sure I read this correctly. So it's got a black screen with some white text over the front of it. It says, Megalodon was a real shark. Legends of giant sharks persist all over the world. There's still great debate about what they may be.
That's not the way you
Each
do
of those
that.
sentences in isolation is fine. Megalodon was a real shark. That is correct. There are legends of giant sharks from around the world. That is true. And yeah, there probably is some debate about what they could be.
But
There is
phrasing it like
no
that is a lot.
cross-correlation between any real scientist being like, yeah, it's Megalodon. No. And so what this movie did, because it was not a documentary, it was a movie. At no point did they, at least in the initial release, did they say at all that the main scientist person, like the sort of the main character essentially, but they put it as a documentary, that this person is an actor. He is an actor. Every person that they interview in this movie is an actor. But they
Even when it is a
portray it,
scientist or one of the
all
legends.
of it, as if it were real. And it starts off with like some footage of like a boat, like some people on the boat were out like fishing or something, and their boat gets, something happens to their boat sinks. The people are never found, of course. But then in my mind, I'm like, well, where'd they get the footage? And again, with even a little bit of like scientific skepticism, all of this falls apart.
Yeah, right. Like
But
you stated,
most
these are
people
actors.
aren't trained to do that.
Right.
So, and the CG that they used was convincing enough. If, especially in 2013, and granted, like the movie Avatar with the blue people came out 4 years before this, and it looked absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So like the CGI was good enough and they put it in specific ways that like made it so like in a really deep underwater camera where there's very little light, put like some stuff in the background where you could just barely see it, where it's like, okay, that looks fairly real.
Gotcha.
But at no point in this very fake, they have come out since and said, this person's not a scientist, he is an actor. Everybody in this is an actor. None of these things actually happened. But at no point in it did they say that. And so immediately as this came out, every marine scientist and paleontologist was like, what? What are you doing? And the film was, again, completely marketed even beforehand as a factual documentary. So it's not like this was an accidental, we forgot to put a disclaimer in it. It was marketed as a documentary.
By people who should know better.
Yes. By people who did know better. They knew that this, but it became the highest rated program in Shark Week history. By far. And so immediately there was backlash from scientists all over the place.
But at that point, the damage is done.
Yeah. And again, like I said, eventually it was revealed that yes, all of it was fake. Everyone was an actor. They later re-edited the film to add just a little bit. So after those initial couple lines at the beginning, they added a separate line that said, events in this program have been dramatized to explore one of these legends. That is all they added.
Which is not going to do anything.
No. And so they also added something else at the end that said, quote, none of the institutions or agencies that appear in the film are associated with it in any way, nor have approved its contents. They put that at the end as somebody is talking. But then almost immediately walk that statement back, because almost immediately afterward, they show another line of text that says, let's see. Though certain events and characters in the film have been dramatized, sightings of, quote, submarine, which is the name that they give this giant shark that they've been tracking, continue to this day. So they immediately are like, yeah, like the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Institute, NOAA, basically the United States' main like ocean research institute, as well as several others from around the world that they sort of mention. None of them are affiliated with us in any way, but the shark might be real.
Right.
And so they re-edited it and added that.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think maybe they'd learn their lesson a little bit. Maybe.
I'm assuming the answer to that is no.
No, because the next year, the following year.
So what year is this?
2014 now.
Oh, okay.
They put out another one, which I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was called Megalodon: The New Evidence, or something to that effect. With the same fake scientist. Same guy, so it's a sequel. It is a direct sequel to that movie.
So this is all just...
And
entertainment. This because education can be entertaining.
This is fiction. That's what we try for on this podcast. We try to make education entertaining.
And this is fiction.
This is pure fiction.
And there's nothing wrong with fiction, but when you're putting fiction on the Discovery
and
Channel,
portraying it as real is the big thing. If you wanted to make a documentary about Megalodon, you easily could. It's an incredibly fascinating animal.
You can hire Gavin.
I'm not nearly qualified. I know many more people that would do a much better job than I would.
You can ask Gavin to find those people for you.
Yes. And a bit of an asterisk here. The CGI in the second one is much, much more blatant. It is very obvious that this is fake footage. The second one is not nearly as egregious, but the first one, it is worth a watch with the context that it is all fake, just to be like, wow, these people are terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And if you happen to have Discovery Plus, Discovery Channel's streaming service, it is on there. And so the second one still treats itself as a real documentary, as if this person is a real scientist. Again, I watched the whole thing, looked for any sort of disclaimer. It doesn't exist. At least not any more of a complete one than the first one had.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until 2018, so 5 years after the first one was put out, that they put out another one called Megalodon. I think Facts versus Fiction was what that one was called.
I mean, this goes on. This goes well beyond people who should know better or do know better and do it. Like this at this point, this is what they want.
Well, this one,
their marching orders to get views.
Right. This one in 2018 was essentially a rewatch of the first one with, I think, 5 or 6 actual scientists, where they would play a clip from the movie, and then the real scientists would talk about it, and the entire time they just completely dump all over that movie.
I mean, that doesn't sound super interesting, but actually that sounds scientific.
Right, and well, it was interesting because they pick people who are entertaining. At one point, so they have a person who, I forget his name, his title apparently was physiologist, or yeah, I believe that's what it was. So somebody who studies not like anatomy, not like where things are, but like different chemical processes, how the body works, essentially.
Right.
So a scientist, but I'm like, that's not the best descriptor of what that person does, probably. But either way, some form of biologist.
Mm-hmm.
But at various points, he's like, no, that's BS, but says the full word and they have to bleep it out. At several points, he says that. He's like, no, that's just completely incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And so they actively call them on their BS in the thing. So, which for me as a scientist felt very validating.
Right, yeah, it's gonna be a little cathartic.
But the damage was by far already done.
Right.
Because many, many people legitimately believe that Megalodon is a currently living shark because of this scientific misinformation, purposeful misinformation spread by the Discovery friggin' Channel for the purpose of making money. That's what bothers me the most about it.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot to be bothered by. Like, the History Channel's gone down a similar road
Mm-hmm.
with programs like Ancient Aliens and and all the other crap. But specifically, like with Shark Week, where it's such a pure and well done thing for so long that
Mm-hmm.
such kind of an important permeated the mainstream in ways that things on Discovery Channel tend not to do.
Right.
And you know, that's at this point, I think that's gone. I don't know.
Absolutely, it is. So,
I don't think people are tuning into Shark Week anymore the way they were. At least, again, I think we talked about this. I don't know if this was on or off air during our last episode. I'm not sure if it was I was young or it was better. Probably a combination of both.
right.
But I'm not sure who's really tuning into Shark Week at this point.
I mean, I'm sure that there are people. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep doing it.
Yeah, well, fair.
And I think it really comes down to, it can be some like boiled down to a relatively recent show that Discovery Channel has produced. It's a show called Dino Hunters.
Dino Hunters.
Don't look it up. It's not worth watching.
I
It
almost want
is,
to bleep out you saying that.
well, because here's the thing. It is a show about commercial paleontologists, which I plan on doing an episode about that at some point, eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But people who go out and find dinosaurs to dig up to sell. Which to me, as an academic paleontologist, I mean, sort of. I don't do research currently. But that is like the highest form of heresy in paleontology.
Mm-hmm.
Like, journals will not publish. Like, if you do research on a private specimen, one not held in like a public collection at a museum or a university or something, almost no journal will publish that research. It'll be like, they will tell you no, because it is not a publicly available specimen.
Really?
Yes. And granted, the journals were behind the ball on this because most scientists said, as soon as this trend even started, said, I will not study anything that is not held in a publicly available space. If it's not in a museum, like an accredited, open to the public museum or a university, I will not research that specimen. Which is good. People should. This is very tricky because, and like, I feel like I've talked about this a bit before on the podcast, because it's like, if it's on your land, yes, it's yours, and you can do with it what you will. That is how America works. Interestingly, that is not how every country works. In Canada, all vertebrate fossils belong to the government, even if they are on your own private land.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you are a rancher in Canada and you find a T-Rex on your ranch, that is not yours. You are legally obligated to contact the authorities, and they will have somebody, like, they might compensate you for it. I'm pretty sure they do to some extent.
It's not the same thing. Similar, like an eminent domain kind of thing in the United
Kind
States.
of, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That is not how the United States works. But so what that was a little bit of a long digression, but what the show does is, it's about these two guys who just kind of go around to people's ranches. They find dinosaurs and they sell them. They find fossils and sell them to people. Most of the time, private collectors who are rich people who don't know. I'm trying not to swear. Who have no other better way to spend their money other than apparently going to space, which is something else that happened this week for some freaking reason. But people buy fossils because they're exotic and they're neat and they're cool, which I agree. I myself bought some fossils before I learned how destructive this is to like the actual science.
Right.
And so, like, people will buy them basically also as a form of investment. Instead of using their money to buy like gold or something, which fluctuates, fossils are only going to get scarcer and scarcer for the most part. So your fossils are always going to increase in value. So rich people are buying them as a form of liquid assets, which really bothers me, But these people in the commercial for the first season, the second season is currently in production, but for the first season of this Dino Hunters show, one of the guys straight up says, "We're in this for the money, not for the science."
That's what bugs.
That is
like, you know
the
what?
tagline that they use for the show.
I mean, if rich people are doing stuff like because they're like, I think that bothers me probably less than it bothers you, just like in general. But if they're doing stuff that actively detracts from science, if it is harmful to the science, I have a real problem with that. I am just as mad about that as anybody is.
Well, and
If
like
it is
I've
that harmful.
like I think I've just sort of casually mentioned during one of our episodes about how Nicolas Cage bought a dinosaur and then it had to be returned.
Yeah, we've never delved deeper into that, but you've
I
mentioned
mean,
it.
so it's I don't know the full story. Basically, Nicolas Cage bought a dinosaur skeleton, or at least a partial one. It turns out it was collected illegally from Mongolia, and so the Mongolian government was like, "Hey, we know you have this. It was stolen. You can either donate it back to us, or we will come get it." And repatriating fossils back to where they are from has become a real conversation in the last couple of years. And that's something that we're actually going to have an episode coming up relatively soon about as well. So I won't talk too much about it, but it's a really long digression from Shark Week. But
Still,
like I said, just Discovery Channel in general, their whole shift from edutainment, entertaining things that are still educational.
right? This doesn't have to be, C-SPAN here.
Right. I mean, I watch C-SPAN, but whatever.
So do I watch C-SPAN, but like, there's a type of person that watches C-SPAN, and it's the type of people that will start a podcast about, science.
Right. But it went from edutainment to full-on entertainment. Very little is concerned about the science anymore with Discovery Channel. And it's been so disappointing. Like, that's just the biggest word. It's just so sad and disappointing to watch.
This sounds similar, just hearing you talk about this, similar to when we did our episodes on Jurassic Park and just kind of the direction that those ended up taking with the sequels.
Well,
I know it's a different kind, but it's the same kind of you could have, there's a way to even do what you're doing in a way that wouldn't make me upset, and you just did it this way.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a fair way to talk about it, because I'm like a firm believer that basically every species could have like a really entertaining documentary made about it. Everything from like a clam to megalodon. Like, you could very comfortably make like a well-animated, high-budget documentary about megalodon. It's a 60-foot shark. It's kind of hard to drop the ball on that.
Right.
But you can make it fun and interesting without lying to people, or at the most generous, willfully misleading them into thinking that it's still alive.
Yes.
Like, it's very hard to drop the ball on it, and yet they did multiple times over multiple years, to the detriment of real science and real paleontology. And it just really bothers me so much.
And to the detriment of their credibility, even though it doesn't seem like that seems to be high on their list at this point.
No. Unfortunately.
Goodness.
That's all I've got to say. So
I mean, for a bonus episode, a half hour, and that is, I think, plenty enough for us. Shark Week, at this point, by the time everybody's hearing this, Shark Week is probably over or close to over or whatever. Yeah. But hopefully you have not marked it on your calendars, as we apparently did. Although I was not really aware it was Shark Week until I saw you posting about it on Facebook.
Yeah, I honestly think that I didn't know it was until I saw some people posting things in a Facebook group that I am in. Perfect. Yeah, so it all just comes full circle. Because Mike and I are boomers and still use Facebook.
All right. Well, I think we can end this bonus episode there.